Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of Marketing Corner with Casper and Jen. And today we are going to be talking about ABM, which is quite timely given that Casper just gave an awesome presentation about ABM and is clearly the market expert on all things ABM.
I think we're pushing it here, but I definitely know a thing or two, that's for sure.
So, I'd like to kick over to you to kick it off, and let's talk a little bit about ABM.
Definitely. I think I just want to do a small shout out to my new microphone here. We're pretty excited about this. We tested a very white voiceover like a few minutes ago. That was not that gets a little bit too hectic in the morning, so we'll keep it here. But we listened to feedback, and now I have a better microphone. So
now you have a better microphone. I got to get my act together.
Well, that's next phase 2.
Yeah, that's phase 2.
But speaking of ABM. So it's like just for the ones who are listening, it's account-based marketing. Account-based marketing is one of those things that's been all the rage for a few years, right? I think it's top 5 of topics I get asked the most about. Like it's what do you do with ABM? How do you do ABM? How can you do it from this company? How can you do it from this perspective? X, Y, Z. And I recently, so when you hear this recording, it's probably a few weeks later, but I recently did a webinar with Leadfeeder on account-based marketing, and I actually had to sit down and reevaluate everything I've done in the last 2 to 3 years. But one of the things, like one of the core fundamentals I think it's important to understand from my perspective is first you gotta decide where does ABM fit in with your entire marketing setup. So for me, I've always worked with I have this like a pillar foundation that I work with, where I say I have 3 pillars that I do advertising in. So I do always on, which is like the stuff that's always active towards like the people always want to be in front of. Then I have what I call campaigns, which are testing grounds. Like I test a lot of concepts and that I introduce into always on. And then I have the outlier of those bunch, if you can call it that, which is ABM. Maybe I'm targeted towards some key accounts, right? So in ABM, so first you have to do that like split and understand that there is a split and there should be a difference between the 3. I allocate approximately 60% to always on, then 20% to each of the 2 others. That's not perfect. It's just if you need a benchmark for your head, then that's a pretty good benchmark. So I think first things first, once you've decided to do ABM, and you can say like personally, like I think ABM, you have to fill in the criteria of saying you have to be a B2B. It's just not possible in B2C. It's not a B2C concept. You got to have a high lifetime value, right? So if you don't have a high lifetime value on your product, let's say you sell, I don't know, something that costs 50,000 ARR a year, in dollars even, then it's just not high enough because the overall the ABM is about having a high customer acquisition cost, but you can only afford to do that because the ROI, the return on investment from these cases is so high, typically the lifetime value, right? Also, if you have a high sales cycle, it has to be quite sophisticated and can take a while. It's not a definitive must, but it's typically one of those indicators of like, hey, ABM is good for me. Also, you got to have a pretty good idea of your ICP. We talked a lot about ICP, and I think you'll cover that a little bit more in a sec, Jen. But you got to have at least an idea of who you're targeting, because otherwise it's going to be an uphill battle. And then lastly, I think this is also a very important part, is that you actually got to have a sales team. If you don't have a sales team, then and here I'm speaking specifically to a lot of these product-led growth companies. They can still do it; it's still possible, but it's a lot. It makes a lot more sense when you have a sales team. It's a lot easier to execute as well. I'm not saying it can't be done with a product-led growth or product-led go-to-market strategy, but it's just it's a lot easier with a sales team. Before I jump to ICP talk, I just want to cover the thing about the 3 types of ABM from my perspective. I think this is shared with a lot of people, so it's not just my perspective. But I view it as there's 3 types. So there's strategic ABM, which is the top. Here you have high return on investment, and you have a very high LTV, high lifetime value. But you also, it is a big investment from your side. And with strategic ABM is what I call one-to-one. So here you literally, this is the classic understanding of ABM. And And let's say you go out and you use the example in the webinar of IKEA, right? You want to close IKEA, then you just make ads and personalized websites and all this stuff. Everything revolves around IKEA. So that's a classic ABM approach, and that requires quite a bit on your side. Like it's very resource heavy from your side as well. Then you have what I call ABM Lite, and this is what we practice the most of in Templafy. We still did some strategic ABM, but we also did, I think, overall, if you look at it, we did a little bit more of ABM Lite. And ABM Lite is what I call one to few, and that just means that typically you find still really big company or companies with high lifetime value, but then they have to share some commonalities. Typically, it's like industry and something. A good example from Templafy would be that we focused a lot on what we call the big four, like big accounting firms and stuff like that. Could be the big accounting firms, big consulting firms. Could also be fintech. It would be all the financial institutions. Some of the big financial institutions, they all share some commonalities together, right? Like they have a lot of the same traits, and that's why you can bucket them a little bit. You still do personalized a lot of stuff, but there's not as personalized as the strategic ABM part. And then there's the last model, which is what I call programmatic ABM, where you essentially do one-to-many. And here, again, it becomes a little bit more broad because you can technically have a huge list. In ABM Lite, I used to have like lists between 10, 20, maybe up to 50 companies, the maximum. Programmatic, you can go very, very high, like 100 to 1,000 or whatever on your list. And here it becomes a lot more about strategically planning, and you can segment a little bit better with your ICP and stuff. But again, it loses a little bit of the very, very personal touch that you have in some of the other models. So I don't know, have you used any of these models before, and Dixa, Jen?
Well, yeah, this is the first time I've heard your kind of breakdown of it, which I think is really cool. Yeah, I mean, the one-to-one is something that you can kind of do. I think there's also some quick and dirty ways you can do the one-to-one, which I think is really cool. When you want to win that one big customer, there's a lot of fun stuff like bidding on the CEO's name, because you know the CEO's Googling themselves and stuff like that. So there's really fun things you can do, which I really like. We at Dixa implemented ABM, and going by your model, it would be programmatic, because we identified 5,000 target must-win accounts that we use an ABM software to target. But we actually decided to jump into ABM because even though we were doing really well with inbound, we were focusing more on SMB. And the 2021 ambition was we needed to go higher market. We needed larger companies, enterprise companies, and those are harder to get on inbound. Not impossible, but much harder to get. So we decided to implement ABM to target these specific accounts that were identified as being a good fit, who would get value. That's the important thing.
Yeah,
We're not targeting anyone.
Yeah.
But our ICP, we like you said, we knew our ICP really well. We know the type of businesses we wanted to win, who stick with us. And so we had a lead intelligence team source 5,000 for us, and we invested in a tool that we use to specifically target these 5,000 accounts in a different kind of variety of ways.
And that makes total sense. And I think it's a good case of saying, like, once you start moving in on some very high lifetime value potential customers, like key accounts, that's when ABM becomes even more interesting, right? So I'm curious a little bit, like, how did you, maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but how did you actually measure success on your ABM whenever you did ABM? Did you have like any, how did you measure it?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because usually we look at ARR. That's how we judge whether or not we're doing a good job. But because ABM is bigger accounts, they take forever to close.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll give you an example. So when we do our inbound, we have an average of like first engagement to one of about 20 to 30 days. From the first time they click on anything to do this to closing, signing on the dotted line. For ABM, we're seeing around 60 days from the first engagement to getting a meeting booked. So already it's over twice the inbound time for that very first touch to get that first contact with them. So it's a very long game. We can't right now look at ARR because we haven't really closed many of them. We only started in 2021. But what we're seeing is what we're basing performance on now is the engagements. Are we getting people clicking on those? And the thing that we can do with our tool is we can see their behavior around the internet.
That's
So
cool.
are they Googling us? Are they visiting competitors? Are they looking up software like ours across the website? So we can gauge their interest and their intent. So we can see that needle moving. We can see those targeted accounts getting more and more green as they learn more and more about our space and then about our product. So that's kind of what we're looking at now is are we moving the needle in terms of intent? Intent signals is what our tool calls them.
Okay.
And are they engaging with us? Are they clicking on our website? Are they visiting certain pages? Are they going to the customized landing pages we built? And then are they opening emails from sales based on their behavior?
Yeah,
Which
but
will
I
be
think
interesting.
that's iOS 15 hint.
Yep.
But we'll
Hint,
cover that
hint.
in a sec. Yeah, I think that's the next episode, by the way, just
That's
for
the next
everyone listening.
episode.
But no, but I think that sounds like a really good way. So I've never had the luxury of using a fancy tool like that. So I've had to
Use
stitch my way.
luxury in inverted commas because it's a hell of a lot of work as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. You're probably right.
Yeah.
But I actually, like, it's funny because you almost bring up the exact same way we did. When I want to suggest the easy route if you just want to get started with ABM and it sometimes you can get caught in this how do we evaluate it, and then become super sophisticated, especially with ABM. Like that is one of the hard ones to actually evaluate. So my suggestion would just be like easy route, a little bit like you already explained, like number of opportunities in the targeted accounts. So are the number of opportunities in those accounts, so personas that are involved, that are getting involved and find you interesting, if you can track that that's going up, then that's a good indicator that you're having traction with your ABM. Then we measured on engagement, so intent measure, and this is what you explain with are they searching for our name and stuff. And here you can have from lots of variety of sources, like get from Google Ads and all that stuff, but you can also get it from G2 Crowd and some of these intent sources, right? Lead feeders are also so I did the webinar with them, but like these sources where you can actually see if the company's visiting your site more. So these are good indicators before you actually close the deal if you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the combination of that is pretty good. One of the things I hacked a little bit, I don't know if you can do that, but is having so you know the tool Hotjar, right? So for anyone listening, Hotjar is just like one of the cheapest good tools out there still, where you essentially install it and then it gives you an idea of what's happening on your website in terms of it looks at your heat map, so you can see if people are moving across your site, what they're clicking on. There's recordings of people interacting with your site stuff. It's really good if whenever you launch a new website or you want to get some feedback on how your website is, what do people actually find your to be working on your site. Anyways, what it does is that typically it randomizes those IPs, right? So one of the hacks I would do is I would take those IPs and then through an API I would send them to Lead Feeder, and then Lead Feeder would tell me what company they came from. So now suddenly I had company information on these IPs that I could see in Hotjar. So suddenly I could see in Hotjar what let's use IKEA as an example. Like I could see what the employees from IKEA, what they were thinking about the landing pages they were landing on. And suddenly we're getting a lot closer to something real, right? I couldn't see the actual person, but I could at least see they came from this company. And it's one of those ways where you can stitch things together and to get a pretty good overview of how you're doing, at least in my opinion.
That's a really great idea. And I think that's, if you have this one account that you're all in, balls to the wall, we're going to try to get this one account, and that's also where, like I said, you can do geo-targeted campaigns to their headquarters. You can bid on the CEO's name, because a good CEO searching for themselves to see what people are saying about them. And that's really good. If you want to win this one account, you dump all the resources you can into it and do fun, hacky things like that.
So I did a talk recently, a few weeks ago. There was this woman called Katrina from Pixels, and she highlighted that the framework they use for ABM. And once I saw that framework, I also realized, okay, that's actually exactly what I've been doing. To just put it into words, right? And I was curious, how do you start? I think that's actually what I want to cover. How would you, if you had to start all over with Dixa, how would you start today? Do you have an idea on that? Do you have a framework? Or
my framework? Well, that's a tough call, because we don't want to just win one person. We want to win. We have our ARR ambition was almost more than double last year. So we really had to get these big accounts and get them fast. So I think the first most important thing is know your ICP. Who the hell are you going after? Now, we were lucky that we can invest in a tool. And in that tool, you have to be super specific about who you're looking for, because not only do they take the companies that you're specifically targeting, but they'll also look for companies who look like that. So it's a really good exercise of who do we want? We have to be super clear about it. So that's really important. And we talk a lot about ICPs in a previous episode as well, didn't we?
Yeah,
so I think
we
that's the
ICP
first
is a
thing.
big thing of ours.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, if you're going to dump money, especially in B2B, right? We need to know.
You gotta know your ICP.
We got to know who's going to stick with us, who's worth the investment, right?
It defines so many things, right? Like when I did this, when I started preparing a lot for it and started mapping out my thoughts around it, I was like, wow, everything I do revolves around my ICP, right?
Messaging, creatives, audiences,
yeah, exactly.
Medium,
like,
everything
you do, right? Like how you interact with them, like on your website, how you do ads, how you do copy, everything, right? If you don't have a pretty good idea of your ICP, and if you don't keep updating that and keep making sure it's actually you're on point with that, then you might lose out a little bit. I think the model Katrina suggested, and the one I've kind of adopted a little bit, is a 4-step model. And I think it's kind of funny because like you're kind of mentioning it already, like
I'm doing something right.
No, but exactly. I think that's the point with some of these things. Is like sometimes if you don't know, like you might not have a model per se for it, but you've just been doing it, and suddenly, okay, you've been doing 9 out of 10 steps, exactly textbook, right? Not based on anything, right? But definitely, like my step is definitely identify ICP, find out who's your best customer, and essentially answer the question, why is it you want more of them? This also includes like calculating your total addressable market. I see a lot of people that pick ICP and forget to look at TAM. And it's such a crucial part of it, like looking at what's actually your TAM. So what's your total addressable market? And sometimes I look at something I call the disrupted TAM. So it means what part of this total addressable market can you realistically go in and influence? You don't have to make it more complicated than that. There's some mathematician that will probably listen to this episode and cringe. But my point is, you don't have to make things more complicated than that. And then secondly, you build your account list. Your tool probably does that for you, but if you don't have a tool for it, once you've decided on your model, then you essentially just say, okay, I'm going to build the account list. I'm going to use a bunch of tools, Zoom Info, Cognicism, yada, 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 whatever. And then you build your account list. And then the model I've suggested here, and I call it designing the how. How do you want to lure them in? And what do you talk about? Like now you identify the ICP, you identify maybe the value props that hit them, but how do you actually get them there? Or like, how do you get them to you? Like, so designing all that stuff, designing everything around that. And then the last part, which I think is what I want to end up with and ask you about, Jen, how do you ensure alignment with sales around this? Because sales is a big part of ABM. And now this is we call Marketing Corner, but this is
Sales
ABM
Corner.
ABM is one of the, in my opinion at least, the most crucial discipline to respect alignment between sales and marketing, because it's way more like everything is team effort, but this is one of the things where if you don't do it as a team, you're not gonna make it. Like you're just not gonna make it, in my opinion. I don't know how have you seen that from your time in Dixa and maybe in the past as well or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where we've really gone. This is the first time I've gone super all in on ABM, hiring getting a tool. We have a 2-year contract. We're all in on this tool. But yeah, I think that was the hardest part, was the alignment with sales. Also, and this feeds into other parts in the structure and how we look at attribution and how we look at KPIs, because that was the big obstacle, right? Because what we do essentially is we have these 5,000 accounts. Marketing do the first outreach in terms of ads. We do we pepper them with ads across social. It has an integration with LinkedIn, it has an integration with Google Display, a bunch of other partners. So they see you around, and then you gradually move them further down the funnel to higher their buyer intent signal, right? Until they get to a point where we say, okay, sales, now is a good time to send that email. Then sales send the email, and then sales to kind of take over or start engaging with them, and they can be more personalized because they can say, hey, based on what they're doing, they can tailor the email around that, right, based on their behavior. But the problem that we have is attribution. Now at Dixa, at the moment, it's a very black and white. Who caused this deal? Was it marketing or sales?
Yeah.
And as we've said many, many times, that's kind of not how the buyer journey works. So we had this big debate, and that was the longest part with like, well, if we look at first click attribution, which sales look at, marketing get 100% of credit, but sales are doing the heavy lifting. We are peppering with ads in the beginning, and then when they hit a certain level, we go, okay, sales, you take over. So it's very much a partnership where we warm them up, we educate them, and then tell sales what they're doing, and then sales take it from there. So the thing that we had to figure out was, how do we attribute? How do we give credit and say, okay, you hit your target? And I know that that's very old school, But that's the framework in which we have to operate. So once we had that, the other thing we had to remember is we were still doing inbound, we were still doing outreach, and then we were doing ABM. So we just added a huge chunk of extra work on marketing and sales. And so even though it was a marketing initiative, you really have to get sales buy-in, because they're like, wait, hold on, now what do I have to do? What do I have to do now? Where do I? And our tool integrates with Salesforce, but they have to look somewhere else in Salesforce. So you have to train the sales team. And the training took a really long time, not because anyone's thick, it's just very complicated, and then it's kind of building that routine into their day-to-day, whereas they look over here on Salesforce every day. Now they have to look here and here and then back and then back. That's hard to get people to do. And so there was that change management, which was really hard too. So I think the two main things we had was, how does this work? Where does marketing start and sales take over? And marketing also provided sales with all kinds of content. And we can talk about the content requirements separately, because that in itself is bonkers. But, giving them the right content, making sure they had access to the right content, making sure they sent that email out in a timely fashion, because we know they're hot right now, and incorporating that into their full-time jobs was difficult. And unlike your model, we did 60% ABM, and then 40%. Yeah, we went all in. Our budget for ABM is 4 to 9 times that of our inbound. We dumped a lot into the ABM, so it's really important that this works.
But you could also say, like in your case, you also did the programmatic version. So if you targeted 5,000 accounts, right? Like it's suddenly the lines between inbound and ABM become a little blurry, right? Some would argue that you're just targeting very focused and just doing that strategy around it.
Well, that's one of the things that we had to be very clear on, and in terms of budgets. And so what we had to do is we had to set up different audiences in Salesforce and HubSpot. So we had inbound, which is anyone not on this list, and that was kind of how we had to do it. So it was like focus on this list of people, and then anyone else who came in would be inbound. And so the inbound budget was one, and then ABM budget was another. And then inbound was treated the same as it had always been done, but ABM got treated a lot more carefully, and because these are the big fish that we're really after. Not to say inbound isn't important, but that's why we're investing to get these bigger clients.
No, but I totally agree. One thing I don't have the answer for, just to take a step back and how you ensure that, is like you talk about our attribution, but I also want to bring up the sole commission model around it. I always like to propose to keep it simple. So in your case, you had it's a huge part of your spend and your budget. So it's important that you really get the finer details nailed out, and I totally respect that. But at the same time, for Templify, I think we did a few things right. We did a lot of things right. But one of the things we did right was we said you have your classic outbound inbound model, right? Well, you have classic BDRs, the cold call, blah blah blah, and then you have your inbound marketing leads, right? So what we introduced was a concept called ADR, account development representative. So the only difference was just that between an outbound and an ADR was that the ADRs were specifically focused on these key accounts. There was assigned, and not a huge list of, hey, here's 5,000 key accounts to go focus on those. It was more like, here's one account, here's this one company, you go get as many meetings with as many important stakeholders in that company as you can. And then maybe sometimes it was a list of 10 companies or 5 companies, but it was very, very few. And in that case, it was super hard to split when, hey, have they seen an ad before, and how you can. And we didn't have access to fancy attribution tools, so it was really hard. So we essentially just made a model like, if it wins, and then marketing has always been a part of it almost. You can always see it, or you can track it. Of course, if you can see it, then it makes it easy. If you can't see it, then we sometimes just give some credit to marketing, and we always give some credit to ADRs as well. So it was more like, you got to find something that works for your company and that works for the case you're doing. But I don't have a good way to solve this. I think you can with some fancy tools, but again, don't let this be the thing that holds you back. That's kind of my point.
That's a great point. Get started. And that's kind of what we were saying. We were like, let's get started, because we didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. Let's get started, and then we'll kind of figure it out as we go. Interesting parts that we had was, what if someone on this list just happens to come in through inbound? Because our ads are out there, we're targeting demographic data that could actually connect with these accounts. Then how do we say, well, this was 100% marketing? This is, it's a sticky situation. And I think it kind of leads to a bigger conversation of, why do we have such a binary approach to attribution? Who did it? Sales and marketing. That's really against the buyer journey, that tool defeats the purpose and it makes you focus on the wrong things. But that's another conversation for another time. We're running a little bit out of time, but I wanted to talk maybe just in my experience about the pros and cons of the system we did, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Just for people. So again, we did according to Casper's model, we did the programmatic 1 to bajillion, or 1 to 5,000. So we were in the higher rank of that. So obviously the pros of that are super detailed. You get user signals. You can see what they're doing across the internet. This may change with iOS 15, which we'll talk about in the next episode. But as it stands before September 20th, we could see what they're doing across the internet. So we can see how interested they're getting, how educated they're getting. And that's a really great indicator of when sales can reach out and be more effective. So it helps us get those big fish that we're trying to catch to help us go a bit more upmarket, get more ROI, because we base it on company size. So the bigger the company, the more revenue.
Yep.
But there are cons to this. As I mentioned, it's expensive. Our tool is over $50,000 a year, and we're locked into a 2-year contract. On top of that, you pay for the contacts you want in. So if we exceed a certain amount, we pay per contact, we pay per license. So more people have it, the more we pay. Then we have to use other tech to figure out the ICP, right? So then there's a whole nother cost associated with using things like similar tech, Clearbit, figuring out what people are using. Then you also pay for the media on top of that. So this doesn't include the actual cost of those Google ads and stuff like that. Our budget allocation is actually between 4 to 9 times what we spend on inbound, because the idea is insane. But the idea being that these are such bigger customers that the return will be greater. It increases with the success of the program. So that's the proposed budgets, but we're still tweaking as we go because we're learning. Super time intensive. You got to learn the tool. You got to set the tool up. You have to do ABM audience segmentation. You have to do competitor analysis. You have to do all this stuff in the tool so the tool knows what they're looking for. And I really want to emphasize, this is something that I was kind of surprised at, was just how content and asset heavy this is, because you're targeting. So for us, we did verticals. That made the most sense for us. So we separated into our core verticals, but then along that other axis, you have where they are in the funnel, right? Because you need to have different ads for when they engage with you more and more, so you can kind of keep pushing them down the funnel. So you have your awareness, consideration, purchase, decision along these verticals. And so you can also throw in other demographics, for example, job function. So when we did 2 different versions, we did a mapping of like, what do we want to do? And so first we did the simple version where we just did verticals and funnel. And that would require 192 different campaigns, 96 landing pages, 780 different ads. And that's just for vertical versus where they're on the funnel. Then we did what we called the full Monty, which was vertical, awareness in the funnel, job title, and job function, which is like the hyper personalized. Do you want to hear
I don't have to do it. No, I can kind of guess we're getting to a high number here.
900 campaigns, 500 landing pages, and 3,600 different ads. If we wanted to really go in,
I think that's the core reason why I call it programmatic. Because this is not that can't be done manually. I guess you didn't do that manually, right?
We did we were working on the simple version, but 96 landing pages is not.
No. It's not a manual process, and that's why the programmatic version, even though, and here you use the tool, which is awesome. I wish I had access to something like that. And like in other ways, like you can do it. Like I stitch stuff together, right? But I think the point is also you lose a little bit of the personalization. Why you can personalize some stuff, like don't get me wrong, like I hope the tool probably helps you personalize a lot of the stuff, and it does. You can't go super into details, like making sure that all the brand colors match and maybe sure that all the copy, like there's so many levels of where you can personalize, and that increases the narrower your focus is. So I think it's a really good case of saying, like, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but figuring out what works for you. So this works for Dixa. For Templify, it was more saying, like, because also with Templify, one case was so typically, let's say you would sell to one of the big fours. Let's use Deloitte as an example. What they have is they have global agreements, but they have regional authority. So that means that each regional office can decide if they want to buy the tool or not once it's been approved globally. So that meant that we could focus on that account for a long time. Even though you sold to one office, then you could still sell to all the other offices, and then roll it out more globally, right? So that meant there was so much lifetime value, so much juice in one account. You just keep banging on that door forever, right? where maybe in the case of Dixa, I wouldn't like that's probably not the same case, right? Like you can probably cancel to some extent, but not exactly the same case, I would assume, without knowing exactly. So and that just brings to the point, like you got to decide the model that works for you.
Yeah.
Like figure out what model that works for you, and this is just our advice, but you got to do some digging yourself.
Yeah, I think the hyper personalized, there's a fine line between cool and creepy.
Yeah.
Right. So you also have to keep that in mind. I think there's something kind of creepy about getting at saying, "Hi, Jen. Good morning. Have a nice commute to work."
I've always been a proponent of the creepy side.
Yeah,
things,
you're a little creepy.
Yeah.
So I think if you're, when I worked for 23, for example, that is a very marketing software for marketers.
Yes.
I think you can be a little cheeky. But when you're not working with marketers, I think you can come off as a little bit intrusive. And so,
super good point. Very, very good point.
Yeah, and we focus on verticals because that's the least creepy thing we can scale. So we'll say a tool for X companies, and then send them to a landing page, send them a customer report or a customer case study from that industry, and that's how we did it. But what we could do is, hey Casper, enjoy your commute to work today. See you at the office. I'll be waiting with a coffee. I know that I saw Terminus give a talk at Inbound, and they said that they would send like a Starbucks gift card to people who visit their website, and it's a bit like, whoa.
I gotta say, I love it.
It's really cool, but I think I'm also a little bit like, where I work.
No, I know, but I love it. But
tougher in a remote world, but
everything in due time, right? I don't. I think we're pushing the boundaries of time here, so let's end this a little bit. But I think there's some really good insights here. Like, and you can see there's a bunch of different models. As I said, we're gonna put the webinar I did recently. There's a recording of that if you want to watch how I went through it. But other than that, good luck with your ABM efforts. And please, if you have any feedback or any stuff you want to share with us on how you did it, please drop it in on LinkedIn or drop it wherever you listen, and then we'll be happy to hear it.
Excellent.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks so much. See you. Bye-bye.